What gives your life meaning? Let's hear from these folks.
What really gives life meaning is just living life to the fullest.
Taking care of somebody other than myself.
Being able to wake up every day and just experience the awesomeness that is this place.
Love.
My friends and my family.
Motivations and goals.
Knowledge and experience.
I don't really know.
I guess you could just say positive operations, man.
There's no absolute meaning without an absolute truth. I'm a Christian, and so I believe that God created me for a purpose.
What is the meaning of life? It is likely that you have asked yourself this question before. This is known as an existential crisis, a state in which you re-examine your life in the context of death and are impacted by the contemplation of the meaning, purpose, or value of life. Existentialism is most commonly associated with several 19th and 20th century philosophers: Soren Kierkegaard, Friedrich Nietzsche, Fyodor Dostoevsky, Martin Heidegger, Jean-Paul Sartre, and Albert Camus. In this video, we are going to talk about one of the most incomprehensible philosophers at all times, Martin Heidegger.
Martin Heidegger is without a doubt the most incomprehensible German philosopher that ever lived. He is considered the most original thinker in the field of contemporary German philosophy and a leading exponent of existentialism and phenomenology. His unfinished magnus opus, Sein und Zeit, or Being and Time, stand out as one of the most significant philosophical writings of the 20th century. Heidegger's ideas in philosophy extends beyond existentialism and phenomenology to such areas as hermeneutics, where he influenced Gadamer and Paul Ricoeur; political theory, where he influenced Hannah Arendt and Herbert Marcuse with Jardine Habermas; in psychology, where he influenced Medard Boss and Ludwig Binswanger; in theology, where he influenced Batman, Karl Rahner, and Paul Tillich; in literary criticism, as testified by Christoph Jarich; and in cognitive science, as testified by Julian Keverstein and Michael Wheeler. His masterpiece, Being and Time, which is filled with complex compound German words like Seinswerkesenheit, Bodenständigkeit, and Wissenverfassung. Yet, beneath the jargon, Heidegger tells us some simple, even at times straightforward truths about the meaning of our lives, the sicknesses of our time, and the routes to freedom. We should bother with him. Martin Heidegger was born in Mieskirch, Germany on the 26th of September 1889. Mieskirch was then a quiet, conservative religious rural town, and that influenced Heidegger and his philosophical thought. He was born and in many ways remained a rural provincial German who loved picking mushrooms, walking in the countryside, and going to bed early. He hated television, airplanes, pop music, and processed food. According to Spielberg and Richardson, Martin Heidegger's first introduction to philosophy came by his reading the first philosophical book casually given to him at the summer of 1907 by the pastor of Trinity Church in Constance, Dr. Konrad Grober. This book was a doctoral thesis of the philosopher and psychologist Franz Brentano, titled On the Manifold Meaning of Being, according to Aristotle. Heidegger was influenced at an early age by the Greeks. Aristotle's Metaphysics, which talks about what it is that unites all possible modes of being. In many ways, the question that ignites and drives Heidegger's philosophy. The most fundamental philosophical question is, why does anything exist at all? Or Heidegger puts it, what does it mean to be? He was fascinated by the Greeks and spent considerable time reflecting on the ancient Greek thoughts. Heidegger's thought is a sort of authentic of the past. He revived the question of being, which is largely forgotten by the metaphysical tradition existing from Plato to Descartes. This is why he was considered as hermeneut, as he played around with language, reinterpreting various philosophical thoughts. William Dilthey, who stressed the role of interpretation and history in the story of human activity, profoundly influenced Heidegger. Heidegger also studied the giants of existentialism, Kierkegaard and Nietzsche, and most importantly, had been a student of the founder of phenomenology, Edmund Husserl. Phenomenology is the philosophical study of structures of consciousness as experienced from the first-person point of view. In other words, phenomenologists try to understand the phenomenon that surrounds our lives, knowing that we live in a self-defined, abstract world. Heidegger began his existentialist philosophy with a profound rejection of this Cartesian dualism regarding object and subject, and a distinction between mind and body, which can be traced back to the rationalist thinker René Descartes, who arrives at one single first principle of human existence. I think thought cannot be separated from me. Therefore, I exist. This makes up his famous Latin philosophical statement, cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am, separating subject from object in mind and body. Heidegger argues that before you think, you have to be. In fact, most of the time we are busy getting stuff done. It's this feature of us that Heidegger pays attention to, the everydayness of human existence. Prior to being a rational animal or a brain, we are firstly just being. His early work as a phenomenologist and university professor culminated in this masterpiece, and one of the most significant works of contemporary European philosophy, Sein und Zeit, or Being and Time. It is a long and complex book many readers initially encountered strange and peculiar vocabulary. The depth of this work intended a profound change of direction for philosophy. The depths of change that Heidegger found it necessary to introduce a large number of neologisms, often connected to dramatic words and phrases in German language. The fundamental concept of being and time is the idea of Dasein, or being there, which simply means existence. It is the experience of human being. The world is full of beings, but human beings are the only ones who care about what it means to be themselves. A human being is the entity, or the individual, or the object, or the person, which in its being has this very being as an issue. In only few odd moments, maybe late at night, or when we were ill and have been alone all day, or are on a walk through the countryside, that we come up against the weird strangeness of everything. Like, why things exist as they do? Why are we here rather than there? Why the world is like this? Why the tree or this house are the way they are? To capture these rare moments, Heidegger talks with capital letters of the mystery of being. His entire philosophy is devoted to getting us to appreciate and respond appropriately to this abstract but crucial concept. Heidegger would tell us that
we are ourselves the entities to be analyzed.
Dasein is what common to all of us, and it is what makes us individuals. Dasein is then not disembodied, transcendent being, but rather the experience of being that is peculiar to human individuals. Being in the world is Heidegger's replacement for terms such as object, subject, consciousness, and world. As mentioned before, Dasein is not a being that can be observed. But then, how can we understand it? Heidegger tells us to study beings, and especially what it is like to be a human being. We need to look what it is unique about our situation as a human being. But what does makes Dasein different from all other beings, like rocks, plants, trees, and animals? To answer this, we must look into the various features of Dasein. These features always remain the same, regardless of what time period it is in the world, whether it is 1000 BC or the 21st century. The first feature of Dasein is that its being as an issue. It takes its own being as an issue, for it is an ontological being. In other words, it asks questions about his own existence. It is always confronted with the questions, what shall I be today, tomorrow, or next year? We may ask, why do I have this job rather than that one? Why am I an instructor and not a doctor? Why am I in relationship with this Gina or Pedro rather than Lisa or Piolo? Why am I alive and easily die? And these questions are to be answered by oneself. Heidegger calls it mindness. The second feature is care or concern. We not only find ourselves in the world, but we care about it as being in the world. Being in includes the notion of staying close to or being familiar with. Thus, in, when applied to other beings, is limited to spatial relations. Example, there is water in the glass. But when it applies to man, this inhood indicates familiarity with something or somebody. This relationship with other things is what Heidegger calls Bersegen or concern. Blackham says, if a thing is said to be in something else, the relationship is spatial. If Dasein is said to be in something, the relationship is not primarily spatial, but means to dwell, to sojourn, to reside, to live or to stay. The word care, as Heidegger tackled the term, which has to do with our engagement with the world for various purposes. To be Dasein is to always be doing something and pointing towards something. To be a being that is constantly engaged in doing tasks that we care about. Two of Heidegger's most basic neologisms, present at hand and ready to hand, are used to describe various attitudes towards things in the world. We are constantly surrounded by equipment with tools or as tools in a context of significance. Our world consists of these things with circumstances which are essential to our being. Heidegger considers objects in their toolness, kapakinabangan ng tao ayon sa kanyang gamit. In this sense, a table in my office is not incorporated to my world if it is not serviceable to me. It is merely a present at hand. But if I consider the table in its toolness as being used for my writing, it becomes fully incorporated into my world and thus becomes ready to hand. Another example is that a pen, an unused pen, is present at hand, but if being used to write or draw, becomes a ready to hand. Thus, every instrument derives its meaning from its functional application. The things we care about is essential focus in Heidegger's philosophy. The word care or Sorge, to express the modes of man's existence in the world, derived from the German word besorgen or Sorge, which means concern, worry or care. Care for Heidegger actually mean more than its ordinary usage, but points to show how man cares and authenticates his own experience. There are three fundamental terms for the care structure of Dasein: existentiality, facticity, and fallenness. Existentiality, this term more often referred to as existence or transcendence. This does not mean existence in the sense in which trees, stones, volcanoes, birds, etc. exist, but refers to Dasein's potentiality for being, its potential to be something. As Kakelman observes, Dasein is thus essentially defined by its power to be. Dasein is always reaching out beyond itself. It is in recognition of this self-projection toward its possibilities that Heidegger and Sartre asserted that existence is the essence of man. Man projected or expected or predicted his self constantly, not to what it already is, not to the past and the present, but towards the future possibilities. As possibility, human existence is the anticipation, the expectation, the projection of the future. Never itself, but moves towards itself, open, dynamic, unfinished, and unclosed. Maurice Green asserts, man is possibility. He has the power to be. His existence is in his choice of the possibilities which are open to him. Facticity or Facticitat, together with thrownness or Geworfenheit, are terms employed by Heidegger to designate the limiting factor of existence. It is the disclosure of the situation in which man finds himself. We are all thrown or projected into the world arbitrarily, born into a given family with a given culture, at any given moment in human history. These givens are our facticities. We are thrown with neither prior knowledge nor individual opinion into a world that was there before and will remain there after we are gone. From the human point of view, thrownness is like the throw of a dice, in which one may throw any number. In the same way in life, one may come up any person, white or black, smart or foolish, tall or short, skinny or chubby or sexy, wealthy or needy, and this has to be accepted without any argument. We may conclude that existence swings in the conflict between possibilities and facticity. The possibilities revealing man as an open project who can transcend into what he is not yet in order to better his conditions, and the facticity showing man as closed by factical situation in which he already finds himself. The final term Heidegger uses is fallenness, or in German, Verfallen. It refers to the inauthentic existence of Dasein. As human beings, we fall into certain tasks by default because of social expectations and people telling us how we should be behaving, making us fall into a herd mentality. We have all fallen into tasks as it is part of our nature. Heidegger calls the behavior of mindlessly following other people as das Man, translated as they self or the they, which is the opposite of authenticity of Dasein and being in the world. Das Man is a mode of existence of being with one another. We surrender our existence to formless entity. Instead of truly choosing to do something that we want to do, we do it because that is what one does, or that is what they do, become mere numbers in the crowd, and live inauthentic lives. Heidegger contrasts this inauthentic Das Man with the authentic Dasein, or own self. Inauthenticity occurs when a person embodies or represents or personifies only their facticity, the reality they have been thrown into, and their fallenness, falling into tasks that are the people tell them to do. The experience of inauthenticity creates dread or fear, and anxiety or worry. One moves right through the edge between nothingness, nonsense, death, and making sense. We need to develop authenticity, a lifelong process of considering the possibilities at our disposal, to understand our facticity and being immersed in it, embracing it, including what Heidegger calls historicity, the cultural and historical context with the rituals and traditions, to be introspective or meditative, reflective about our fallenness and to avoid the trap of Das Man and become Dasein. It is to be responsible to one's whole human nature, to have accepted oneself as thrown, finite, and mortal. Authenticity can come into existence when we arrive at the realization of who we are and grasp the fact that each human being is a distinctive entity. Out of this authenticity comes the idea of being toward death, the ultimate possibility and inevitability that we all have to deal with is death. It is too easy to get lost in the everyday until we face death and start thinking about who we truly were. Ironically, for the first time, we actually live for ourselves without spending time thinking about the approval of other people on who we are. When asked how we might recover authenticity, Heidegger replied that we should simply spend more time in the graveyards. To live authentically is to recognize the inevitability of death in the context of our everyday living, so as to live life to the fullest. This is being toward death. The second most important feature of the book apart from being is time. Heidegger calls it as a temporality. Dasein is time. We are embodied time. We go from being in the world to care to temporality. Temporality is the ultimate meaning of being in the world and care. The anticipation of death is the ultimate source of meaning of temporality. Being needs to be understood. We are not just temporal beings, but authentically historical beings belonging not only to ourselves, but also to our ancestors, community, and species. Heidegger's early thought was completely dominated by an analysis of Dasein as being in the world. This early Heidegger, the Dasein period, is frequently referred to as the period of Heidegger I. Dissatisfied with the basic approach of being and time, which made it impossible for him to write the projected second part of the book, to be named Time and Being, there was a shift of Heidegger's thinking which he himself called the turn, or die Kere. Da Kere, or turning point, was a period of poetic thought which began with his writing The Essence of the Ground in 1929, and it is so-called period of Heidegger II. In his later writings, being rather than the sign is the starting point. The question of being returned to the fore. Heidegger in his letter on humanism said, "Here, everything is reversed." Heidegger also distances his view from Jean-Paul Sartre's existentialism, particularly as being and nothingness, which retakes the Husserlian and Cartesian point of view of objects and subjects, and he starts to shift his focus to poetry, language, and technology. His later thinking is encapsulated in his contributions to philosophy, written in a very poetic style. It can be said that the earlier as well as later Heidegger were concerned with the question of being, while the earlier Heidegger of being and time approached this question through an analysis of Dasein. The later Heidegger confronts being directly with no spatial approach or method needed to access it. Though the question of being returned to the fore in Heidegger's later writings, he later became increasingly doubtful that philosophy has the capacity to properly articulate the truth of being. Heidegger became captivated by the compelling power of poetry as a means to unveil the mystery of being. The later Heidegger was also concerned that in our modern society, we are so immersed in technology that we disconnect ourselves from being, from the world, and from nature. He tries to explore the essence of technology. Heidegger cleared that he was not against technology. He simply tried to understand the nature of it and warn us against the potential danger to human existence. The later Heidegger also introduces the concept of the lost God and famously announces that only a God can save us. What Heidegger has in mind is not a religious intervention in an ordinary sense of the divine. He argued that we are waiting for a God who will reawaken us to the poetic. This task certainly seems to be a noble one. Unfortunately, it plunges us into the most controversial region of Heideggerian philosophy, his famous involvement with Nazism. It is quite strange how someone could author Being and Time and become one of the greatest philosophers of the 20th century could also be into Nazism. Commentators describe Heidegger wandering into National Socialism because he believes that the German people were destined to carry out a monumental spiritual mission and that his philosophy could contribute to the whole nation. After the war, he had stated that his participation in the movement had been the biggest stupidity of his life, and yet Heidegger never really took responsibility and apologized for his past actions. To conclude, I would be lying to say that Heidegger's meaning and moral is ever very clear. Nevertheless, what he tells us is fascinating, wise, raw, and surprisingly useful. Despite the extraordinary words and language, in a sense, we know a lot of it already. We merely need reminding and encouraging to take it seriously, which the odd prose style helps us to do so. Despite all the criticisms, what we really need to focus on his ideas. It is through these ideas that we can be critically engaged with a sustained investigation into being, to think deeply about you, your life, your time, and appreciate his massive contribution to human thoughts.